Let's assume we're pretty comfortable with creating and modifying document libraries, with adding a column of metadata or two to a library or a list in order to customize it. And then let's assume that we're doing that for a business purpose. For example, in our organization, every single document in many of our libraries is owned by a particular group or department. And so we're going to have this owner column show up all the time. Now, we'll get really good at adding this custom column if we do it often enough, but it would be better if we could find a way to say, we actually have a version of a document that includes a custom column called owner. The same thing is true in our custom lists. If over and over again we find ourselves creating employee lists with the same custom columns or vendor lists with the same custom columns, we can actually create those lists and say, when we say employee, these are the columns we mean. When we say vendor, this is the information we expect to have there. Long before we find ourselves getting really great at adding the same columns to libraries or lists, I hope that we'll learn about content types, because what a content type does is it creates a type, like a document, for example, that's specific to our own enterprise. So if we believe that every document has an owner in most of the libraries, then what we can do is add owner to a document and create a new document type for our own documents. That document type would already have this metadata attached, and every time we would create a document library then, we would simply say, don't use the built-in document type in SharePoint, use our content type, and that way we won't have to add metadata. So a content type is a happy integration of our metadata with whatever would already exist in the list, whether it's a document or a list item. Let's go take a look at another example so we can see how useful this is and how we can drill down in this a lot. Let's say I have a document library that has 3 documents in it, 2 Word docs, 1 Excel workbook. One way of thinking about documents is by file type, and that's a kind of metadata. But the documents are something more than that. If you were to say, those documents in your library, what are they? And I'd say, well, a couple of words, 1 Excel. You might say, but wait a second, what are they good for? What's actually in them? Because document type and even title is only one small piece of the metadata. So I'm going to say, well, actually, I've got a contract, a budget, and a plan sitting in those 3 documents. Now, it might be true that some of our contracts are done in Word and some are done in Excel, that some of our plans are done in Word and some of them are done in Project. It's hard to know. I can't simply use file type to be able to abstract what exact type of document I have. So file type and content type, they're not the same thing. Sometimes people confuse them. I can use whatever tool I want to create a project plan. And if it happens to be in Excel, I might go, oh, Excel, it must be a budget. But it's not. It's a project plan. So let's imagine that I have this library, and I want to know what category to place each of these documents in. I can add a metadata column for category. That's what we've been doing up until now. And I could have choices of metadata like, is it a contract, is it a budget, or is it a plan? But it's a little more complex than that because there's actually different metadata that I want to track for each of these different types of documents. If I have a library with contracts in it, I'll want to know what company the contract is being written with and who's reviewing the contract and when it was reviewed. I want to know what the contract's effective date is. These are the types of metadata that I'd like to have for a contract, but they're not the metadata that I need to have for a budget. For a budget, I want to know what the fiscal year is and the scope of the budget. Is it for the enterprise or for a division, for a particular team, or perhaps for a retail store? And I want to know who owns this budget. So one way to address this is to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We'll collect all of this metadata about every single document in this library, whether we need it or not. But that's the long way around the block, and it's going to frustrate our users because we're going to have a lot of empty data, or we'll have people filling in information that we don't really want. The fast way is to notice that we actually have 3 different types of documents in this library. One type might be contracts, one budget, one plans. They might be different in your library. But there's one more reason that we want to think of this as 3 different types of documents, 3 different types of content. And that is that we don't really want our library to have metadata. We want our documents to have metadata. That's been the point all along. So by defining some extra information, what we're going to do is actually create a type of document that's called a budget that has corresponding metadata for fiscal year, scope, and owner. And we're going to create a type of document called a contract that collects metadata about the company and when the contract was reviewed and by who and what its effective date is. There's one more bonus with content types, and it's huge. If I take any one of these documents and move it to another library, its metadata is going to go along with it because the metadata is part of the content type. So even if I move it to a library that doesn't have any of these columns in it, the metadata will still be attached to the document. This is really exciting stuff. When we start imagining how we're going to keep track of documents, what content types allow us to do is to recognize the real distinctions between documents in a business. When you hold a document in your hand, it's not just a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation or an Excel spreadsheet. It's actually a very specific type of document, and you can figure out what to do with it as soon as you look. Based on its type, you know whether it needs to be routed to a particular person or whether it needs to be secured immediately so nobody else can see it. Maybe you shouldn't even look at it yourself. Perhaps it's confidential employee data, and I'm going to make sure that that's locked down. If it's a document that has to have a long shelf life because we have to retain it for legal reasons, I'm going to treat it differently than I'm going to treat a few notes about what we might do at the next company event. Content types are one of the most powerful features of SharePoint. If you're relatively new to being a SharePoint power user, or if you're having an increasing role in your SharePoint environment, or if you're a document specialist, spending time understanding what content types are, how to create them, and how to work with them will be time very well spent in SharePoint Online.